Jacob, who is Israel, Yisrael, lives the final 17 years of his life in Egypt. Before his passing, he asks Joseph to take an oath that he will bury him in the Holy Land. And he blesses Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, elevating them to the status of his own sons as progenitors of tribes with the nation of Israel. So part of the significance of that, by the way, is that the magic number for the tribes of Israel is 12. There are 12 tribes. But when Manasseh and Ephraim become tribes, then there are 13 tribes. So how does that work? Well, that works in the sense that when the tribes are counted according to the military counting of the tribes, then they can't count the tribe of Levi because the Levi'im, the tribe of Levi, are the priests. So they get left out. And then Manasseh and Ephraim are counted, and then you have 12. And then when you're counting the tribes as a whole, Manasseh and Ephraim are no longer counted as separate. It's just the tribe of Joseph. And the tribe of Levi is added back in, and then you get 12 again. So that's a little game that's played with the numbers and the narration of the Torah going forward. Jacob blesses his sons, assigning to each his role as a tribe, and Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are rebuked for the various things that they did. Among the blessings, Naphtali is granted the swiftness of a deer, Benjamin the ferociousness of a wolf, and Joseph is blessed with beauty and fertility. A large funeral procession consisting of Jacob's descendants, Pharaoh's ministers, the leading citizens of Egypt, and the Egyptian cavalry accompanies Jacob on his final journey to the Holy Land, where he is buried in the Machpelah cave in Hebron. Joseph also dies in Egypt at the age of 110, and he too instructs that his bones be taken out of Egypt and buried in the Holy Land, but this would happen only with the Israelites' exodus from Egypt many years later. Before he dies, Joseph tells the children of Israel, Hashem will surely remember you and bring you up out of this land to the land of your ancestors. Okay, here's the verse we're looking at. This is the scene where Yaakov, Yisrael, is blessing Joseph's sons. And it says, Vayevarchem bayom hohu lemor. He blessed them on that day, saying, Becha yevarech Yisrael. In you Israel shall bless, lemor, saying, Yesimcha Elohim ke Ephraim v'che Menashe. May Elohim make you like Ephraim and Menashe, putting Ephraim before Menashe. So there's a few things about this. There's a custom for parents to bless their sons with this formula on Friday nights at dinner, before the dinner, before Kiddush usually. And also, Menashe is the firstborn, so it should say, may you be like Menashe and Ephraim, but Jacob, Yisrael, turns them around and puts his right hand on Ephraim instead. And so that's what we're going to look at today a little bit. But first, let's look at this other verse from Psalm 118. Lo yamut ki echyeh, I shall not die but live. Vasaper ma'aseh Yah, and I shall express the works of the divine. So Reb Yitzchak of Vorki taught about this verse. In order to really live, echyeh, a person must give themselves over to death, amut. And whenever a person does this, one discovers, I shall not die but live. Lo amut, I will not die, ki echyeh, but I will live. So we can apply this to the universal fear of death that we have. Naturally, we all have a fear of death. We don't want to go into non-being. And this is the fundamental existential fear that we all have, which stems from the sense of being a separate being, of being an entity. And that sense of being a somebody, of being an entity, is also what we call ego. It's not something we want to get rid of. It's a natural thing. But it's also not something that we have to be rooted in primarily. We can, as a matter of the effect or the fruit of our spiritual practice, shift our center of attention, our center of identification from that sense of being a separate entity to the whole of which we are part, which we also call Hashem, or the divine. And part of how we can do that is by accepting, embracing the fact that this form, this body-mind, is temporary. Really bring it into our consciousness, because the ordinary way is just to, of course we know it, but it's to not think about it and to kind of just be in a sense of denial about it. Not an intellectual denial, we know it's true, but an emotional denial, like not really confronting it. And so that's what this teaching is about. But it can also be about all the many smaller kinds of death, meaning the deaths of things that we are attached to in this life. In other words, fear of change and the suffering that comes with letting go. That's probably a more common and probably easier way to deal with it at first, although both of those are very important. So the human nervous system is a heaven-hell engine. Which will your engine produce? So the whole purpose of the spiritual path is to produce heaven, that is, for heaven to be born within. To do this requires not just the conscious choice to do this, but also faithfulness. The moment that we make this commitment to be faithful to the path, then we're really on the path. Many people can be in a situation where for a long time they're interested in the path and they step on it in a partial way many times and then forget about it for a while. But when you start to develop this quality of faithfulness to it, where even if you feel like you're coming away from it, which is something that happens probably to some degree every day, all the time, still there's this sense that you're always going to return to it. There's a commitment to be faithful as much as you can, as opposed to just putting it aside and forgetting about it for months or something. You need faithfulness because there is a common pitfall. You need it for many reasons, but for this one reason we'll talk about today. If you wish to have heaven and not hell, you may think that somehow you can avoid the hell, avoid the suffering. But just like physical birth, there is pain in birthing heaven. A person must be willing to endure this pain to get to the other side. And here, by the way, we're not talking so much about physical pain. We're talking about a kind of existential, emotional pain. Without faithfulness, you are likely to give up at this point. But if you persevere, the pain of suffering begins to look entirely different. As in the birth of a child, it is ultimately a blessing. And this is Israel talking to Yosef. Vayomer kachem na elai, bring them to me, va'avarchem, that I may bless them. Jacob is dying, and he asks his son Yosef to bring his two sons to him that he may bless them first. Joseph arranges his sons with the older brother Manasseh at Jacob's right and the younger brother Ephraim at Jacob's left. This way, the older will get the blessing of the firstborn from Jacob's right hand, as was the custom. However, Yaakov reverses his hands, putting his right hand on Ephraim's head instead. Yesimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'chemenashe. May Elohim make you like Ephraim and Menashe. V'yasem et Ephraim lifnei Menashe. And he put Ephraim before Menashe. Why does Jacob switch his hands and reverse the order? And furthermore, today, there's a tradition for parents to bless their sons on Shabbat with these words. What's so special of Ephraim and Menashe that they should become the paradigm for blessing boys? Let's go back a few readings to Parshat Miketz, when Yosef names his sons. He names his firstborn son Menashe because he says, the divine has made me forget, and the word for forget there is nashani, my troubles. He names the second son Ephraim because the divine has made me fruitful, hifrani, in the land of my suffering. These two names actually describe the process of spiritual awakening and the birth of the inner heaven. First, there must be an intensification of awareness in the body, and this is what we always practice together at the beginning of our silent meditation. And by putting awareness in the body, there's an anchoring of the mind in the present. This, by necessity, entails a surrendering of mental preoccupation with the past and with the suffering that is created by this type of thought. The ordinary worries of the mind The troubles are forgotten. This opens a new space in one's consciousness that was previously taken up by excessive thinking. After that space is opened up, the spiritual fruit can be born within, and that's the inner heaven. But as the verse says, the divine has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. In order for this inner light to come forth, one must first fully feel any emotional pain that has previously been blocked. Most people have a good amount of suppressed pain from a lifetime of difficult experiences. So when feelings are unpleasant, we naturally want to avoid them. We can become expert at putting up inner barriers so we don't have to feel them. But those inner barriers take energy. They divide us internally and block us from our own life energy and from life as it is happening in this moment. They block the blossoming of heaven on earth. Okay, so our resistance to our experience, whether it's suffering or anything else, that resistance itself clutters up the space. When you begin to open to this inner suffering, you may want to turn back. It's easy to forget the good that lies at the other end. And perhaps this is why Jacob reversed his hands, putting Ephraim first in the formula. Yisimcha Elohim ke-Ephraim v'che-Menashe, putting Ephraim first. Why? Ephraim means fruitfulness. And so the idea here is that we remember the fruit. Remember that the fruit is the point. You won't have to walk through hell eternally. Despite the fundamentalist idea, the fundamentalist Christian idea that we hear, that they're about the eternal fire hells. I mean, the eternal hellfires. It's interesting that that's not really a Jewish idea at all. There is in the mythology of Judaism the idea of hell, or an idea of hell, but it's actually something that's temporary in all of its forms that I've ever heard of. It's more like a cleansing, something the soul has to go through to be cleansed before it can ascend. But to me, all of these ideas are really pointing to what we experience in our lifetime. Do we have the attitude that suffering is eternal, that it's just that there's no escape, that we're just stuck in this suffering? Or do we understand that suffering is an experience, that it comes and it goes? And to the degree that we open to it when it comes, that it can actually do something positive. It can burn away our resistance to things if we allow it to. Meaning that when we resist things, we create an inner clutteredness or an inner tightness. And when we open to it, that the substance of that tightness can burn away through opening to the fires of suffering. There is another hint of this in the verb Joseph uses when he says that the divine made him forget, nashani, his troubles. The root of nashani is nun, shin, he. Besides the meaning to cause one to forget, the verb also means to feminize. Interesting. In classical symbolism, feminine means receptive. In Kabbalah, for example, the feminine side of the tree is receiving the impulse from the masculine side. This, of course, is just taking biology as a symbol and applying it to the dynamics of life. And so feminine is seen as the opposite of aggressiveness, which is often characterized as masculine. Perhaps this is why the blessing of Ephraim and Menashe has been traditionally used for boys. If you truly wish to awaken, you need to temper the masculine quality of willfulness with the feminine quality of openness. In this openness, you may have to suffer some pain that emerges, but it will pass, and its fire will transform you. Like the fiery sword that guards the Garden of Eden, you must pass through, allowing it to slay all that is false. Jacob gives his blessing on the threshold of Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus that we begin next week, where his descendants descend into the suffering of slavery, only to be saved and brought to freedom. May we all receive this instruction, and with it the faith and commitment to walk through the fires of whatever hell emerges in service of the divine presence that wants to be born through each of us. Amen. So may it be.